First off, I just want to say, what does Hispanic Heritage Month mean to you? And especially just reflecting on what's happening now in America.
Hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on Hispanic heritage, what it means today, and why I understand that there's great value in pausing for these next 30 days to really reflect on our legacy and the possibility as a Latina in this ecosystem here. It has been unique. Latino people are a mix. Many of us have our ancestral roots, indigenous. Some have African influences along with our European um, influences as well. And today, I think that with the conflict and with a lot of the tensions that exist among those very groups, a lot of the that energy courses through our being, through our blood, and many of us, at least myself, have to figure out ways to reconcile a lot of these differences and being pulled in different directions. Today, I don't recognize this country. I'm thought that a few years ago, when I was watching the dismantling of rights for women, that we were in peril, and that was that was a few years ago. But now I can honestly say that with all of the advancements that we have worked together in support of the public good for everybody across the spectrum, whatever ethnicity you are, it's just saddens me that I feel like we're going back, and we're going back to a time when we have to return to maybe the roots of what this country was built upon, which is the Constitution. So the dismantling of the Constitution is what I am seeing as a Latina who is born and raised in this country, someone who has contributed in her own unique way, has been given great opportunities in front of me to really lift up the parts of the community that I care most about and make my contributions in the way that feel that I can make them. But the sadness of where we are today is definitely a cloud over this Hispanic Heritage Month.
Yeah. Now, you talk about the sort of the culture that you grew up here, because you weren't born in Sullivan County.
No, no, I am a native New Yorker in many ways. Born in Manhattan, raised in Queens, graduated from Brentwood schools on Long Island, and I've been living between Ulster and Sullivan counties for the last 38 years of my life. I intentionally raised my two sons in these rural communities because I understood that we could probably etch out a really beautiful life here, which I think we did.
Yeah. Now, and grow up again, in a more populated area, and coming up to Sullivan County. What were some of the differences you've seen? Because you also have a mixed heritage. You're a Colombian, and you have Italian American roots there, born here in America. Having those two different perspectives, growing up in more quote unquote urban place in the city and Long Island, and then coming here to Sullivan County, where it's more rural, and Ulster County was more rural. What are some of the differences you have seen?
Sure. Um, Growing up in Queens, Richmond Hill, Queens, going to Jamaica schools, Queens is very diverse. So seeing people in leadership positions that actually look like you was very common. It was not an uncommon situation. And then graduating from Brentwood schools, which was another community where there was a diversity, there was a real richness of leadership, of decision makers, of stakeholders who, again, resembled me, was enriching, and that has created my vision of how I feel that you know the world should look. Now, coming up here to the Catskills, to the Southern Catskills 37, 38 years ago was a bit of a culture shock. I was unaware of a lot of things, in particular I was unaware of many of the tensions in rural communities, the lack of resources, the lack of enrichment. I've had to do a lot of enrichment for my two sons and raising my family because of the lack of, let's shall we say, cultural expression in this area. I've had to be sure that my children and that my own roots were reflective in their upbringing.
Right. Because you being in New York and city and it's such a multicultural place. That's something I similar experience I had coming up. I grew up in the Bronx, coming up here and seeing like the school systems, school districts, and how some of them are not diverse, not because not to their own faults, but just because of the population that's here. Well, I may cut that out there. But just looking back, the population has boomed in recent years. The Hispanic and Latino community has boomed in recent years, according to the latest census. Um, but yet there's not a lot of representation in government officials and people, I say of power in power in Sullivan County. Do you think that's an issue?
It's always an issue. It was an issue when I first moved here. When I moved to Sullivan County, I was part of a group of parents, and we were starting the first dual language enrichment program in a rural community in the United States of America. We had researchers come from across the country to study and see what we were doing with Spanish language predominant students and the English students. The goal of the program at that time in Benjamin Kozer Elementary School was to be sure that we had kids from kindergarten to fifth grade that were bilingual and biliterate. And what that did, that was like a microcosm, right? Because in order to keep that program going, we had to be sure that we did the outreach to find the educators that could keep that program growing every year. So, because of little movements like that, we were able to ensure in the school district that we did have educators that were reflective of our culture, our ethnicity, and our language. So the program was, it's like the pendulum. It goes
Hmm.
in one direction and it comes in the other. And I think that that is a microcosm of the struggles that we see in a variety of areas. I mean, I live in Fallsburg. 70% of the student population identifies as Latino. You can imagine what the residents look like. We are very diverse, but yet you still go to the town hall and there is nobody there at the desk to respond to any of your needs, whether you have an issue with your water bill, if you need another tax bill, whatever it is that the municipality should be providing, there is no language access. And that's not unique. I think for Sullivan County, I would say that that's pretty common.
Mm. How have you seen the community grow over the years since you've been here?
um there's this like real misunderstanding about things. People think that if they shut down stuff for Spanish speakers or they just stop providing a type of service that people are going to stop coming here, and that's not the truth. you know Immigrants are part of what is allowing this community to flourish. There are immigrants from all over the world who are coming here to Sullivan County. Sometimes you may think you are interacting with someone who might be African American, but they are Dominican, they're from Haiti, or they're from some other country in the Caribbean, and they are professional people, and they are homeowners, and they are contributing to the tax base. And we do not understand who exactly is holding up this community and who is uh, making the contributions. I think that many of the stereotypes that regrettably are attributed to Latino people get hurled at us as insults. And that is just, that's the white supremacy that is continuing their narrative.
Now, I want to talk about your activism and sort of what sort of sparked it. From what I understand, is you came up here and sort of the conditions of the farm workers in the Hudson Valley, and then that sort of sparked. I believe in 1988. That's my short research I did. 1988. You sort of became involved with some of the farm workers up here.
So, yes, my activism up in upstate New York was kind of like a bolt of lightning that was sent into the center of my existence, moving to a farm and seeing the regressive ways that many of the labor laws were just subjecting neighbors who were at that time in Ulster County. It was apples. And then moving over here to the other side of the ridge in Sullivan County and just seeing how a lot of the economic development that was being done and the corporate welfare that was being shelled out for low wage jobs and jobs that offered no protections, but jobs that were really exploiting an undocumented workforce. And it was almost exclusively an undocumented workforce. And that raised many flags for me. And I took it upon myself to try to educate my neighbors and say, look, any employer that is just going to hire an undocumented workforce, we need to be a little bit more astute and we need to be aware and we need to hold them accountable because once you pull the curtain back, you often see that that there's wage theft, that there's mistreatment of workers, and there's just a real element of cruelty that is being in the case of Sullivan County and the Empire Zone and IDAs was being subsidized by Sullivan County taxpayers.
Right, and it's sort of sparked your activism to do something.
Yes, so
Um,
that was the birth of maybe what I will call the citizen activist.
Now, you've we talked off the air here during the pandemic how many essential workers were the many essential workers were migrants who had to come to back to work, especially like the farms and the factories that we have here in Sullivan County, where are mostly employed by Hispanic workers. They were hit the hardest. Do you have any stories from that time that sort of stood with you in that fight? Because I know you spoke about getting like say perfect example was like Murray's Chicken in South Fallsburg. I remember I had a time there with that then Assembly member, no state senator, excuse me, Jen Metzger, handing out masks and hand sanitizers to the workers because they were being affected the most because they're close quarters that they worked in.
Yeah. Well, essential workers, what a difference a day makes for
Mm,
essential workers. We go from the pandemic where essential workers had to go in and continue work in agriculture and food production to where essential workers are today, being hunted in the fields at their workplace because of the color of their skin. But going back to the pandemic did not reveal any new allies. Many of us who were accompanying essential workers and immigrant workers at that time realized quickly that their safety and their unwillingness to reorganize their work to discourage the transmission of the infection was against the bottom line of a lot of the industries that they worked in. So it was a matter of the community coming together to blow the whistle and to expose what was happening because we had an alarming number of individuals who died and became very sick and were not able to recover as a result of what they were exposed to during the pandemic. We had workers who did not earn their wages and lost wages, and there was never any type of recompense for these individuals who endured what they had to endure during the pandemic. So I don't know if I've gotten to the heart of the
yeah.
question, but I'm going to say that everything that we saw during the pandemic was exacerbated by this community's lack of going to where we should have had some prioritization, essential workers, where we should be ensuring that these folks were going to be safe. And we didn't do that. They were an afterthought. In Sullivan County, these workers, these individuals with frail health are often the beginning of the narrative in a lot of the not for profit industrial complex grants. So, a lot of the organizations know how to get money off of the backs of the statistical data for the despair within the Latino community, but because they had no relationships. They had no real relationships rooted in respect and reciprocity that had them outside the plants or that put any type of pressure on these employers to do the right thing from the inside. Because I'm still a little bit resentful that we had to be out there in front of these plants. We had to be out there handing out masks. This should have come from every single HR department. This should have been something that was coordinated with public health, who was on our side, who was not a new friend, and who accompanied workers. But I did not see the Chamber of Commerce jump in. I did not see the Partnership for Economic Development jump in. I did not see any of these entities that promote, even the Visitors Association, demand that these employers from the inside do the right thing and reorganize themselves and prioritize the health of their Latino, almost exclusively Latino workforce. So, no, we didn't make any new friends in the pandemic.
Mm.
And I probably won't make any new friends after this comment.
Now, one thing that has been happening, and I just spoke to someone in Ulster County recently that there was a recent ICE raid there. Immigration enforcement, especially ICE, has been sort of a source of fear in many communities here, especially in Sullivan County. Have you seen that affect families locally? And do you have any stories there as far as like what have you seen as far as the fear the Latino community is facing right now?
Well, the Latino community is facing a lot of fear. Right now, for Latino people or even people who just look Latino, the most sensitive time is traveling to and from work.
Mm.
Those are very, very vulnerable times for us right now. Um, we have had a couple of targeted um, detentions in this community. We see that ICE is working in tandem with some of the county offices like probation, like um, being on notice when people are about to successfully complete their probation. It's my understanding that two people, the recent two detainees, were part of that equation in Liberty. I want to say about 2.5 weeks ago. Thankfully, we have not had the level of raids that we're seeing in other parts of the state, and maybe that has something to do with the fact that we did not label ourselves a sanctuary
Mm.
community or not. Because you know what? You see in some of these upstate, northern upstate places that are ruby red, they're still going in there. So some people say, yeah, well, we don't have the sanctuary and we didn't. I know the sheriff, actually, I disagree with Mike Schiff on many things, but I have to say that the sheriff has been a straight shooter and he has been a person of his word when it's come to the defense and to not cooperating with ICE when they come to Sullivan County. And but just because we do not have a label of sanctuary, it doesn't protect us because it did not protect these other communities, again, in ruby red parts of New York State where the entire workforce was separated by color. If you saw what happened a week and a half ago
Hmm.
in the snack factory up in northern New York, workers were separated. The white ones stand over here and the brown ones stand over here. Again, I don't recognize this country anymore.
Yeah, and you and I both know that you can't tell who's American by skin color anymore. Like you mentioned, you had a story about mistaking an African American for an African American. I have a funny story. I remember going to the bodega I grew up in the Bronx. I remember going to the bodega in the Bronx, and it was an African man man who I thought was African, who's black, behind the counter, and buying my potato chips there, 25 cents when it used to cost 25 cents, and he started speaking Spanish, and I'm looking at him, and I look at my mother, and coming home, I was like, he spoke Spanish. Speaks so Spanish so well. I say, well, he's Dominican, that's why.
Right.
And we all come in different shades, different colors, and things like that. One thing I want to bring up, and I'm going back here because I just sort of talk about the like the Hispanic experience here. You grew up in a mixed culture, being Colombian, Italian American, and being born here in America. I'm Ecuadorian and Puerto Rican, but born here in America. And I growing up, I always felt sort of an identity crisis of what culture I belong in. Because where I lived in Bronx, Ecuadorians and Puerto Ricans were very different from each other. The stereotype of Puerto Ricans were like loud and whatever. And when I grew up in my Ecuadorian side was very quiet, very reserved, and very uppity. You could say, and those cultures clash. And I was growing up was battling, where do I belong? And then I said, oh yeah, I'm American. But then of course, growing up being told that you're not American because the way you look. That was hard to sort of hear. But I don't know if you have any experiences in that that dynamic of growing up with these two cultures.
Plenty, plenty, a lifetime of experiences. Latino people are not a monolith, and we are so diverse. Um, Colombian culture is very different than the Puerto Rican neighborhoods that I was raised in. 124th Street, Jamaica, Queens was very rich in Puerto Rican culture, and even just s- coming home and having some of the Puerto Rican slang to my Spanish was enough to send the Castilian speaking Colombians at the dinner table through the roof. So, you know, um, we have a rich diversity within our culture. But as far as the diversity, I I feel like Latino people are almost built a little bit better for a multiracial
Hmm.
understanding because of our own familial diversity, and because of the heritage, and because I look the way I look, and I know my indigenous roots are very strong. Just by looking at me, you can see that. And yet I arrived with a name like Sandra Oxford, and it's incredibly bewildering for other people and challenging to understand how that can happen. Because people always ask me, what country are you from? And I'm like, I'm from 124th Street, Jamaica, Queens. That's what country I'm from. What country are you from? You know? Um, I think that we have to help younger people to navigate these waters, because we do travel through different cultures just because of who we
Hmm.
are, because of the language we speak, because of the comfort of being in a white space where some of us tend to be maybe, the only um, person that looks like us in these spaces, and we have to show up. And I've been educated in this country, so I have as much providence to be in that space as anyone
Yeah.
else. The melanin in my skin should not impact that. So it's very interesting. And what I love to do is I like to talk to people over the phone, and then when they meet me in person, it's a very very different experience for them. They think the wrong person arrived.
You mentioned young people, and that's actually one of my questions I had. What advice do you give young people, especially from the immigrant or Latino, Latinx backgrounds, who want to make a change? Because I think really the new generation that's growing up are seeing things, um, what's going on, and maybe want to change things. Like I see at least some of the inspiring people, like the rural migrant.
Rural Migrant Ministry,
Ministry.
RMM.
I see a lot of empowered young folks there, and what advice would you give them as far as that they want to make a change?
Well, I would just start with, sometimes some of the values that our families have, we think that they are antiquated and that they are not useful or purposeful in this modern life. And I want to share that they really are. and a lot of the values that our families bring with them to this country are very affirming, and they are part of what at least has kept me very safe and has kept me on the right track. Respect, an understanding of, in Latin, I raised two sons. So I always talked about el macho completo, complete man, and that the maleness is really a holistic and a complete thing. It is not about power over, it is not about dominance over women. It is something that is much deeper than that, and that in our culture, there is a place of respect for men as there is for women, as there is for the mutual obligation that we have to each other. And that is something, the obligación mutua, that we need to understand for newcomers and also for young people. The elders have a role in this, in ensuring that we do this in the right way, because there's some very important original instructions about how we are supposed to be with each other. And maybe that comes from our indigenous roots,
Mm.
because that too is just part of how we treat each other, how we treat the earth, how we are going to be. The other thing is, know your history of this country, know your history of your family's struggle here, and understand that we have to be in this for the long game right now. With the way the shift is happening, if we understand history and we see that there have been two reconstructions in our history in this country where Black people made a decision collectively to go and fight and to get off of the plantations and to stop slavery. It was Black people who actually were the ones who eliminated slavery. People want to give the victory to elected officials. No, it was that collective action by Black people, and unfortunately, the backlash of that first Reconstruction was Jim Crow, the Black Codes, and then we see the second Reconstruction during the Civil Rights Movement, where we had Latino people participate in the Civil Rights Movement in this country, because brown people were also discriminated against when it came to accessing justice and the Constitution the way others. I think we're in the third Reconstruction,
Mm.
because all of those same things that we were fighting for the first two times is everything that we are fighting for right now. You saw birthright citizenship go head to head and toe to toe. Now we're looking at the Fourth Amendment, which is the fact that they can probably stop me just because of the way I look, and detain me. Free speech. That's my favorite. That's my favorite amendment right there. Here we are. Um, all of these things that we were trying to defend from white supremacy from the beginning is something that we are still defending right now at this very moment.
If people listening to this or watching this took away one message from this month, what would it be?
One message from this month is, I invite everyone here to learn more about your neighbors in the listening region who are Latino. Latino people, we tend to be very warm people. We usually greet you with a hug. You often become part of our adoptive family. We have a long tradition of having our madrinas and madrinos, and we always make our family larger that way. We always invite more people to our table, because we get it. We understand the value of the collective, and we understand the value of the entire continuum from our elders to our newest, the newest young babies that are joining our communities. So Latino people tend to be, I feel, incredibly welcoming people.
Okay. Well, Sandy, thank you so much for joining me. We were talking to Sandy Oxford, well-known activist in Sullivan County, Ulster County, and beyond. Thank you so much for joining me for Hispanic Heritage Month.
Feliz día, gracias.